We are here in Rome, Roma, the eternal city, La Città Eterna, where layers of empire, faith, and art rise one upon another in visible form. Just across the Tiber River, within the independent city-state of Vatican City, Città del Vaticano, stands a complex that has shaped the spiritual and artistic direction of the Western world for centuries. This is not simply a landmark on a map. It is the symbolic and physical heart of Christianity, and one of the most concentrated expressions of artistic genius anywhere on Earth. In this episode, we are going to explore how a simple 1st century burial site became one of the most powerful architectural statements in the world. We will look at the history beneath St. Peter's, the Renaissance vision that rebuilt it, the artistic genius of Michelangelo Buonarroti, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and the extraordinary artistic legacy preserved inside the Vatican Museums. To understand why this place matters, we also have to understand something about Italian culture. In Italy, art and architecture are never just decoration. They are identity. They are power. They are history made visible. From ancient Rome to the Renaissance, Italy shaped the visual language of the Western world, and nowhere is that legacy more complete than under the dome of St. Peter's. Before we step inside, let's begin where every visitor begins, in the open air, approaching St. Peter's for the first time. Imagine walking through the narrow Roman streets, where buildings rise closely around you, and the city feels intimate and almost compressed. But then, suddenly, the space expands. The sky opens. The sound shifts. You emerge onto St. Peter's Square, Piazza San Pietro, and the sheer scale is almost disorienting. The Basilica does not reveal itself slowly. It confronts you with magnificence. The great facade stretches wide across your field of vision, and above it rises Michelangelo's infamous dome, La Cupola, steady and commanding against the Roman sky. You are no longer simply walking through a city. You are entering a carefully choreographed architectural experience, one that was designed to move you before you even understand why. Whether you are religious or not, you are about to step into one of the most powerful architectural statements in human history. Before we enter the Basilica, La Basilica di San Pietro, we have to understand where we are standing. This is Vatican City, Città del Vaticano, an independent sovereign state, the smallest country in the world, but spiritually one of the most influential places on Earth. Yet beneath your feet is something far older than Christianity. In the 1st century, this area was not a sacred center. It was a necropolis, a burial ground, located just outside the ancient Roman city. Nearby was the Circus of Nero, Il Circo di Nerone, a racetrack and site of brutal public executions. According to early Christian tradition, it was here, around the year 64, that a man named Peter was crucified upside down at his own request, because he did not feel worthy to die in the same manner as Christ. Peter was not born into power. He was a fisherman from Galilee, originally named Simon. In the Gospels, Christ gives him the name Petros, meaning rock, declaring, "Upon this rock I will build my church." In Christian theology, Peter becomes the first bishop of Rome and the first pope. His authority is understood not as political, but spiritual. Yet over centuries, that spiritual authority would shape the politics of Europe. The site of his burial became a quiet place of devotion for early Christians who risked persecution simply to gather there. Now, before St. Peter's in the Vatican, there was this. This basilica was built by order of Emperor Constantine between 318 and 322, a few years after the Edict of Milan. On the side, round chapels were built, where the emperor's Theodosians and their family were buried. The obelisk is that of the ancient circus of Nero, Circo di Nerone, on which the basilica was built. Here were crowned the popes, and it was here that Emperor Charles Magnus in the year 800 was also crowned. During the year 846, it was raided by the Saracens. Pope Leo IV built the walls to defend the Vatican and rebuild the damaged parts. That first basilica stood for over 1,000 years. It was enormous for its time, decorated with intricate mosaics, columns taken from earlier Roman buildings, and a timber roof. Pilgrims came from across Europe to kneel near Peter's grave. But by the 15th century, the structure was deteriorating. The roof sagged, the walls cracked. Renaissance Rome was rising around it, and the popes of that era did not simply want repair, they wanted transformation. Now we will explain how the Renaissance reshaped this sacred space. In 1506, Pope Julius II, Papa Giulio II, made the radical decision to demolish Constantine's basilica entirely and replace it with something that would rival the grandeur of ancient Rome itself. Julius was known as the warrior pope, ambitious, politically aggressive, and deeply invested in restoring Rome's status as the cultural capital of the world. He commissioned Donato Bramante as the chief architect. Bramante envisioned a centralized Greek cross plan crowned with a massive dome. His design drew inspiration from the Pantheon and from classical Roman ideals of perfect proportion. This was humanism infused with theology. It was the rebirth of ancient geometry in service of Christian symbolism. But Bramante died before construction advanced significantly. Rafael was brought in. Then Antonio da Sangallo the Younger. Each proposed modifications. The project stalled, shifted, evolved. It was not simply construction. It was a debate about what Christian architecture should be in the Renaissance world. Then, in 1546, Michelangelo, already in his 70s, reluctantly accepted the role of chief architect. He called the previous designs confused and overcomplicated. Michelangelo simplified the plan, strengthened the piers, and most importantly, designed the dome. His dome would become one of the defining silhouettes of Rome. Michelangelo did not invent the concept of a dome over a crossing, but he elevated it. The structure is double-shelled, meaning one dome sits within another, reducing weight, while increasing height. It rises more than 400 feet above the floor. The drum is encircled by colossal columns. The ribs create both strength and upward movement. When you stand beneath it, your eye is pulled toward heaven without even realizing why. Michelangelo once said he wanted to create a form that appeared to rise naturally from the building, rather than sit on top of it. Unfortunately, he would not live to see it completed. Construction finished decades after his death, but the essential design remains his. It is one of the purest expressions of Renaissance spatial ambition ever built. But what happens when you step inside? The first sensation is scale. The nave stretches nearly 600 feet. The proportions are so vast that your sense of measurement becomes unreliable. Letters in the interior inscriptions appear normal in size until you realize they are over 6 feet tall. The floor is inlaid with colored marble in geometric designs that echo Roman antiquity. Every surface is polished, intentional, luminous. Immediately to the right, as you enter, is Michelangelo's Pietà, sculpted when he was only 24 years old. Carved from Carrara marble, the sculpture depicts Mary holding the lifeless body of Christ. The drapery flows with impossible softness. The anatomy of Christ is both idealized and heartbreakingly real. Mary appears youthful, serene, composed. Michelangelo was blending classical beauty with sacred sorrow. The sculpture is polished so finely that it seems to glow under the basilica's light. This is not simply religious art. It is the Renaissance belief that divine truth can be expressed through perfect human form. As you move forward, the high altar stands directly above Peter's tomb. Beneath it, deep below the floor level, archaeologists have excavated the necropolis and identified what many believe to be Peter's original burial site. Pilgrims can descend to see the ancient foundations and fragments of the first basilica. There, layers of history stack visibly. Pagan Rome beneath Christian Rome, beneath Renaissance Rome. It is an archaeological narrative of transformation. Above the altar rises Bernini's Baldacchino, commissioned in 1624 by Pope Urban VIII. Bernini was only in his 20s when he began this project. He was already a sculptural prodigy, but this commission solidified his dominance in Baroque Rome. The Baldacchino is nearly 100 feet tall. Cast in bronze, partially taken from the Pantheon. Its twisted Solomonic columns reference the Temple of Solomon, and also echo columns believed to have stood in Constantine's Basilica. Angels and bees, symbols of the Barberini family, decorate its surfaces. The structure both frames and dramatizes the altar. It is theatrical without being chaotic. It marks the sacred center of the basilica while drawing your gaze upward towards Michelangelo's dome. Behind the altar, in the apse, Bernini later created the chair of St. Peter, La Cattedra Petri, a monumental relic encasing what tradition holds to be Peter's episcopal throne. Above it, a stained alabaster window glows with golden light, depicting the Holy Spirit as a dove. Sculpted clouds and rays burst outward. Light becomes theology. Baroque art does not whisper, it persuades. Now we will go outside again because St. Peter's Square is not an afterthought. Between 1656 and 1667, Bernini designed the grand colonnade embracing the piazza. Pope Alexander VII commissioned him to create a space capable of holding enormous crowds during papal blessings. Bernini conceived of the square as two massive semicircles formed by 4 rows of Tuscan columns. He described them as the maternal arms of the Church, reaching out to embrace humanity. The geometry is intentional. From specific marked points on the ground, the 4 rows align perfectly, appearing as one. It is optical mastery. Amazingly, although many say the intention of the design by Bernini was simply to portray the open arms of the Church, it can be further argued that the complex, when viewed from above, even resembles a key, representing the keys of heaven given to St. Peter by Christ. The obelisk at the center predates Christianity entirely. It was brought from Egypt to Rome by Emperor Caligula and later repositioned here. Again, Rome absorbs and redefines its past, rather than erasing it. Now we will widen our lens to include the Vatican Museums, I Musei Vaticani. The museums began in the early 16th century when Pope Julius II displayed his collection of classical sculptures in the Belvedere courtyard, Il Cortile del Belvedere. Over centuries, successive popes expanded the collections. Today, the museums form one of the most extensive art complexes in the world. Visitors move through ancient Roman statues, Renaissance tapestries, Rafael's frescoed rooms, and finally the Sistine Chapel, La Cappella Sistina. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512, is perhaps the most famous painted surface in existence. The creation of Adam, where God's finger reaches toward humanity, has become an icon beyond Christianity. And later, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment on the altar wall. The human body becomes the vehicle for divine narrative. The Vatican Museums are not separate from St. Peter's. They are part of the same cultural project. The popes were not only spiritual leaders, they were patrons who shaped the trajectory of Western art. Along the upper walls of the Sistine Chapel, just beneath the dramatic scenes of Moses and Christ, you'll notice a series of painted figures seated in architectural niches. These are the early popes, the successors of St. Peter, depicted as solemn witnesses to the unfolding story of salvation above them. Their presence anchors the chapel in apostolic continuity. While Michelangelo's ceiling often captures all the attention, these papal figures quietly reinforce the central message of the Vatican itself. that authority flows in an unbroken line from Peter to the present. As we conclude, remember that St. Peter's Basilica is not just a church. It is an amalgamation of power, faith, ambition, grief, genius, and reinvention. Beneath it lies a grave from the 1st century. Above it rises a dome from the 16th. Around it stretches a square from the 17th. Within walking distance stands a museum holding the artistic legacy of an entire civilization. When you stand there, you are not simply visiting a monument. You are standing at the intersection of empire and eternity. And perhaps that's why St. Peter's never feels finished. It is still being restored, still being studied, still receiving millions of visitors who come searching for meaning, beauty, and history. The stone remains. The dome still lifts the eye upward. The square still opens its arms. And whether you arrive as a pilgrim, a tourist, or a student of art history, St. Peter's will leave you altered, because it was built to do exactly that.